Hello everybody. By the time you see this, I will be well on my way to get married, which is very exciting for me and I am looking forward to it, but at the same time I regret to inform you that the Ted Kaczynski video will once again be pushed back another month. Hopefully you all understand, and I'm really sorry for that, but I didn't want to leave you with nothing while I go off to get hitched. So for one, we have today's video, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And for two, as you can probably see, I am excited to announce new merch. That is right, after more than a year at this point of no merchandise, I finally have got some cool stuff in store. For one, we have this super comfortable hoodie that not only has the word Wendigoon stitched into the front in this cool Nordic writing, but on the back has this fantastic pyramid and iceberg design. And the design of it, as mentioned, isn't just a printed on design on the front of the material, it is actually stitched into the lining of the fabric itself. But not only do we have that fantastic hoodie, as you can see, I finally have released a Wendigoon Hawaiian shirt. That is right, not only a Hawaiian shirt, but it is Wendigoon approved. As you can see, it features several iceberg designs, as well as flowers with a creepy eye in the center of them, and of course, a Wendigoon logo on the shirt pocket, because if I design a shirt, it's absolutely going to have a shirt pocket. I'm working with Juniper to bring these designs to you, and I for one am blown away by the quality. When they sent me the products for review, I was over the moon about it, and hopefully you are as well. Now, what's important to remember about these two designs is that they'll only be available for a very limited amount of time. We're only selling these things for a couple weeks, and then after that, they're gone forever. So if you're interested in either or both of these products, head to the link in the description and get them while you can. Because when I'm inevitably hauled off to jail and all of the pictures in the news of me getting the handcuffs thrown on have this pocket shirt or this pyramid on my back, you're going to be jealous that you didn't get it while you could. So get these while you can and stick around for today's very special interview. In research for my video about the Unabomber, I came across an FBI agent who worked on the case herself. In the interview that you are about to hear, we discuss everything from the FBI's emotions and ideas as the Unabomber case became unraveled. We talk about the general reactions of the press and society as the bombings continued, as well as the legacy and motivations of Ted Kaczynski himself. This is an interview that I am frankly quite lucky to get a hold of, and hopefully you all enjoy listening to. Now, I found the agent in today's interview through my own research, and can validate for myself that she is in fact an FBI agent. However, she's also received things like death threats for her involvement with the FBI and several of the high-profile cases that she's worked. And because of that, she has wished to remain anonymous. And of course, I'm respecting that, but can validate for you all, for whatever my credibility is worth, that this is in fact an FBI agent and not somebody that I paid to lie and say they were an FBI agent. Probably. Normally, I would just post this on my second channel, Wendigang, and then when the main video comes out, link off to it. But honestly, I feel kind of bad about not giving you all the video right now, because really, I do think this is going to be a special video, and I think that it just needs some more time. And with the wedding, I didn't want to have to worry about both. And sorry, everyone, but my wife does come first. So I want to make sure that the Unabomber video is the best it can possibly be, but I also don't want to leave you all hanging. So hopefully you can listen to this, get some enjoyment out of it, get prepped for the upcoming main channel video, and then when that video does come out, I'll take the interview off of this channel and put it on Wendigang. So hopefully this holds you all off for just a little bit, and again, thank you all so much for being here. So enjoy the interview, say nice things about her in the comments, because not a lot of feds will work with a YouTuber whose name is Wendigoon and made videos about things like Waco. So let her know that she's appreciated down in the comments. Enjoy the interview, and again, check out this merch while you can, because in a couple weeks, it'll be gone forever. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. First of all, I want to say, again, thank you very much for coming on. Do you care to whatever degree you're comfortable, mention what your relation is to the Unabomber case?
Sure. Well, I worked on the Unabomber case for just a few years while in San Francisco, mostly early 90s, and pretty much left there about the time that the manifesto was going to be published. So that was about my involvement with the Unabomber investigation.
That was certainly that was kind of like the climax of the entire investigation too, because I mean you obviously know, but for those listening, the manifesto being published is what eventually led to his arrest. So you were there for really like the hottest moment of the case, I would say.
Well, certainly, leading up to, his identification and subsequent arrest and conviction. But yeah, it was an interesting time because, right in the middle of us, the task force, it was a large task force, I might add, right in the middle of us really working and thinking that we're getting somewhere, in the investigation towards identifying him, we get the manifesto, that he sends to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, and then that's shared with the task force. And so then, now we felt like, hey, we're there. I think we're going to get this guy identified finally after a long, long time of him, basically just terrorizing the country for so long.
Yeah.
So it was an exciting time to be there.
I could only imagine because like this would be around the time you were there. He was threatening to blow up airplanes. He was, there. I think there were 16 bombs up right before the manifesto was published. I can only imagine what kind of the pressure you all felt to get this guy caught.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of pressure, and quite frankly, we were sort of all over the map. This guy throughout the years, and as you know from your research, he'd been doing this, I think, for about 17 years at that time, and there really was, as soon as you felt like, when I say you, I'm meaning our task force, as soon as you felt like, maybe we're getting somewhere and we know who this guy is. For example, he's affiliated with a university because these bombs are being either sent to universities or they're being placed. He would physically go into, some universities. UC Berkeley is the one that comes to mind, and place bombs. So as soon as we felt like, hey, we know this guy's got to be affiliated or he has a gripe or a beef with the universities, then the target would switch, and now it's airlines, and so then it went to computer, IT field, computer scientists, engineering. We just, could not get a good grasp of what this guy's true motive was and who his targets were.
Yeah, yeah. And it's fascinating because I remember reading about a lot of that. There was a lot of different theories passed around about, well, maybe he had this for a career. I think for a while before the 90s, like because he had a 6-year gap in between his bombings.
Right. Yeah.
Early on, one of the theories I read was that he was like an airline mechanic or that he like worked at an airport or something like that. Mm-hmm. But then as more, computer-led attacks happened, people began to kind of, change their idea a bit as to what the motivation might be.
Correct. And the airline theory was a pretty, a large focus. And I think that, just based on some of the bombs that he was sending, the fact that, he sent one to the United president, he, placed one on an airline. We felt at that time fairly confident that he grew up in the Chicago area. I mean, we felt like we were pretty certain on 3 things, that he grew up in the Chicago area, and that he lived in San Francisco and in Salt Lake City, I think, at some point. And we knew that he had, most of his bombs were handcrafted, homemade bombs. So we felt like he had a skill set or some skills within the machinery, and that he was a machinist or a mechanic of some sort. And sort of based on a lot of information that we had, there was a pretty large focus on the fact that he wasn't probably or possibly, I should say, an airline mechanic, and that he had a problem with United. And being that United at the time, and maybe they still do, I'm not sure, had a very large hub in San Francisco, a maintenance facility, if you will, there. That there was a lot of, belief that he may work for United and may be a disgruntled mechanic or worked in their machine shop or their maintenance facility.
And that makes sense for several reasons. Not only his targets being, related to United or, flights in general, but also there was a unique level of craftsmanship to the actual explosives themselves, wasn't there?
Right. Yeah, that's why I said most of the components of his bomb, like I said, they were handcrafted. He handmade these bombs, and only the few things were ever bought. When that would be like some of the shrapnel or maybe some screws, but the bombs themselves were, handcrafted, and that led the task force to believe that he had some skill with machinery, and possibly a machinist, or that he had that capability. And obviously he did to some degree because he was handcrafting these, but that just was one piece of the investigation that led to the theories that hey, somebody's targeting, he's targeting United. He sends a bomb to the president of United right after he puts a bomb on an American airliner, that fortunately at that time he didn't have his bombs weren't that sophisticated, and he obviously got better along the way, but at that time his bombs weren't that sophisticated, or probably would have brought down the airliner, and killed substantially more people. But just based on some at that time, like I said, he was elusive, and his targets changed. But at that time, there was a lot of resources being sent to United to try to see if this was an employee of United, possibly at the maintenance facility.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would make sense again that, you all would believe it had some connection to the airlines, especially given its targets. But then, bombs began primarily to be delivered to universities after, like, Northwestern and stuff like that. I know they went to, like,
Right.
Vanderbilt, Berkeley, colleges like that. So then the targets became a bit more spread out, right?
Right, and I think again, I'm going back several years, but I remember that that was part of the belief that he lived in San Francisco, because the bombs at Berkeley, if I'm not mistaken, were left in a lab.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they were hand delivered. And so it's like, well, he must live in San Francisco, or lives in that area, because then shortly thereafter, I think he sends the bomb to the Forestry Association president, I think in somewhere in Northern California, Sacramento. And so, there was a belief that he lived in that area. But yeah, he, after the airlines, then he goes to these, engineering labs, and then he's, back to IT, computer scientists, individuals, or professors, or research scientists, things of that, people of that nature. And then there was the one out of nowhere comes the ad executive that lived on in the Northeast somewhere. I can't remember exactly where, but so he was hard. He was very elusive. It was hard to determine what the motive would be before we got the manifesto.
Yeah.
Just was. It just really felt like that he either had an affiliation maybe with United or an airline, or somebody within the university. That maybe he was felt like he had been mistreated or what have you at one of these universities by a professor or something.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it was always fascinating to me because the first death that occurred from his bombs was the 11th bomb, I believe, or 11th or 12th. It was the 11th one. That's right. I have to get him straight in my head. The first guy he ended up killing was just a computer store owner, like just a guy who ran a shop. Was that I believe this was in '85, so it would have been before you came onto the case. But I imagine that had to be a bit of like a surprise of sorts, right? Like, why target basically a Radio Shack when your previous targets were like colleges?
Right. That's why I said he was, he was a pretty elusive target, because there didn't seem to be, commonality with his targets. At first, it's his first several were university. I think they were professors or they were affiliated with universities, let's say. And then he moves to, what looks like he's got a gripe or, against airlines, because he puts a bomb on an airliner. Then he sends one to the United president. And then, after that, I think is when he went to, I don't know if that's when he went to the computer scientists or to the engineers, but his bombs were getting better. His bombs were getting better as time went on. And that, again, was putting a lot of pressure, on the Bureau to get this solved, ATF, the FBI, postal inspectors. I mean, wasn't just the FBI. There were several agencies, it was a multi-agency task force. But, there's just a lot of pressure because his bombs were getting better and starting to, kill people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And what's interesting, too, a bunch of people talk about Kaczynski, and they'll say things to the effect of, like, oh, well, I mean, like, sure, he was a terrorist, but he didn't kill that many people compared to, say, an event like 9/11 or something like that.
Right.
But the only reason he didn't is out of accident. Because, like, one of his first bombs was trying to blow up an airplane, right?
Right.
And in his own notebook that he wrote, he was, like, frustrated that he wasn't killing more people with the bombs, that they were ineffective, as he considered them. So the only reason he didn't kill that many just seemed to be, I mean, lucky coincidence for those on the receiving end, but it just seemed that the bombs weren't working the way he intended.
Right. That's why I like to say his early bombs weren't that sophisticated. They weren't that, obviously dangerous enough to injure people and severely injure them, but he got better. He got better as time went on, and like you say, frustrated that his bombs weren't killing more people. And then he, upped the game, as they say,
Yeah, yeah. Which thankfully, he was caught when he was, because his last two bombings, or two of the three last ones, each resulted in a fatality. So he was definitely getting more destructive as time went on, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that's what I said, going back to the pressure, to try to, and the manpower and the resources that were spent on this, especially, early 90s. And, again, I know not just saying the early 90s, there was a lot of time and a lot of resources and manpower over the course of the 17-year period. But, when the bombs picked up, there was just more pressure to try to, and technology was better at that time too, trying to get, parts of his bomb identified, DNA, just things like that. It was getting better. But just a lot of resources and manpower trying to identify, lots of different aspects. There was, like I said, the airline, there was, going to, we believe he's from Chicago, because he, and he put, this came back to me. He, on several of the bombs, he would leave his signature. He would have the initials FC. So, now you're looking at was that his name, is that his initials? And I think later it came out that stood for, I think, Freedom Club.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken. But that, and then on one of the bombs, there was some clues about it was Robert, and then the initial V, Robert V.
Yep.
So now, now you're looking at every Robert V, in the Chicago area or going to school. So it's just, a lot of resources just trying to, run down every single possible lead that we had to try to identify this guy. And, fortunately for us, he got frustrated enough that he sent the manifesto, to the New York Times, Washington Post, to be published. And, that took several months of, decision making up at a much higher level of whether or not to publish, the manifesto, because, it was kind of an extortion. Publish my manifesto, I'll stop sending bombs.
Yeah.
And you never, obviously never want to give in to terrorist demands. But, that led to the big decision on whether or not to publish that. Unfortunately, they did. Or who knows where we would be today.
Absolutely. And what do you think was one of the main reasons, or maybe the main reason, that they decided to publish the manifesto?
I think they felt like that there were enough that his people's writing style it's unique. Each individual has a unique writing style, and you don't normally see two people with the same writing style. And I think they felt like there was enough individualism into his writing that somebody would recognize it. He used a lot of the same phrases. He used, certain, they could tell that he was very intelligent by, his grammar, his punctuation, and the writing stuff, I think they just felt like somebody would recognize that. And then once they got it, before it was published, I think it was, they disseminated that to some professors within like Northwestern and, the areas that they thought he grew up, to see if any teachers, professors, anybody recognized, some of the colloquialisms, things that he, talked about in his manifesto and the style. And ultimately it did, right? I mean, I think that they felt like somebody would, and I believe the sister-in-law, right, was the first to recognize it and talk to her, to his brother, Ted Kaczynski's brother. But I think she was the first one that started saying, I've heard him, I've heard these phrases, I've heard this terminology, I've heard this, but yeah, I think ultimately that was the decision. And at the same time, we didn't feel like we were making, inroads into identifying him either.
Yeah.
So that was maybe the best possible, outcome would be if somebody could identify him based on that, and it worked out.
Absolutely. Was there, to rewind a little bit, when you were, you're doing the investigation, you're trying to find this guy, there's a lot of, like you said, sort of red herrings, like the name written or FC. I remember there was an indentation on an envelope that said like Nathan R.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's all these like different paths you're taking. You're trying to figure out. What was the like general reaction within your departments when a manifesto shows up from this guy, and it's pretty much as the motive that you've been trying to figure out laid out in detail. What was that like to receive that?
Well, it was, I guess, in some ways a little bit shocking is maybe a little an exaggeration, but it was kind of like this, industrial, technology I don't think was really on our radar, and again, I'm just speaking for the limited time that I was there. There may be agents that were involved in that long time that would say, oh no, it was on my, I thought that. So I'm just, again, to clarify from, my time there, it didn't seem to be, on the radar that that was his motive, that it was, anti-technology, that this industrial, technology is going to destroy humanity, So I think, it was a little bit surprisrising to see the manifesto or hear. I didn't read it personally. I just, we were briefed on it, because it was very, very long, very long. But, I think it was just a little bit surprising because it really wasn't on the radar that was his motive. It all seemed like for someone to terrorize this country for 17 years, to kill people, injure people, severely injure people, you would think that it was more along the lines of something personal. I think that's what we all felt like, or a lot of people felt like anyway, that, again, that he was a disgruntled employee of some sort, that he felt, mistreated, neglected, or what have you, by a professor, that it would be something personal, and then it turns out to be he just feels like industrial, or technology is going to destroy humanity. I mean, I'm just summing it up in a
Of course,
nutshell,
yeah.
But
That's the basic gist of it. You've got it, yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah, you kind of wonder what he would do now, right, with artificial intelligence, if he thought that was going to stop,
It is, like, and I think one of the reasons a lot of people, kind of, I don't want to say appreciate, because, again, he killed 3 people, but the reason a lot of people kind of hear him out, so to speak, more than others, is because back in the 90s, he was, in the manifesto, he spoke of how one day people will care more about their image through the internet than they will in person, how people will lose social connections because they'll be so consumed with the internet, which is almost prophetic in a sense of a lot of what the internet has become. So I think that's one of the reasons that he's, again, favored feels like a weird way to say it, but people think of him not as just a domestic terrorist a lot of the time because of, notions like that.
Well, if you could separate the two, right? If you could take away, his beliefs and his theories and where the world was headed with, technology and like you were saying with the internet and social relationships, if you could take that and separate it from the fact that he murdered 3 people and injured dozens others, to get that point across, that always seems to, be a little bit, on the, I guess, mentally ill side, of things that, and that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
But, it just seems like if you could separate the two, get your ideas out there, get your theories out, but like we were talking earlier, you don't have to do that through violence, and killing people that you don't even know, innocent people. And some of the people that were even that he targeted, weren't the people that were injured or killed. It would be an assistant or an innocent person that just picked it up, a secretary or assistant. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't even the people that he targeted. And again, those people had nothing to do with, the beliefs that he had. So I don't know.
I believe it was the Vanderbilt one. He was sending it to a professor, and the professor's secretary opened it, and she was like, she lived, but she had like intense mangling to her arm. Had to be rushed to the hospital. And in Kaczynski's diary, which basically was a diary, the journal he was keeping, he wrote, he mentioned something like, "Turns out the wrong person got hit. The secretary got the bomb, not the professor. Too bad I can't make them more lethal." Like, there was no hint of remorse that the wrong person got it, that it hit the wrong target. He was just mad that he didn't kill someone with it. Which I think goes to speak of his true motives a lot more than parts of the manifesto do.
Right, but isn't it sort of hard to wrap your mind around that a person says, "I'm going to go place this bomb." I guess the one that comes to my mind is the one that he placed at Berkeley, that was in a lab. He just placed it in there for somebody to pick up.
Yeah.
I think an engineering student, I don't think it was engineering student, picked it up. Mm-hmm. So it just, let me just put it in there and, see if I can get lucky and kill somebody.
Yeah.
And so, what is the connection there? So that's why it always seemed, personal to, that this was somebody who was acting on revenge or something that had been done to him personally, because it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the fact that someone who believes that the, technology is going to destroy humanity will go out and kill people, and not give a reason.
That's an interesting point you just brought up that I hadn't really thought of yet. It makes sense that you all would think this is some kind of revenge motive or what have you, because his targets seem to be just random people. But then when you find out he's some, like, to himself, some do-gooder, an altruist, it's like, oh, well then why did you blow up a secretary and like an engineering student? Yeah, I haven't thought about it that way, but I see where the confusion would be on your part.
Well, because it's hard, I think, as an investigator to wrap your mind around the fact that someone can just go out and kill random people, send bombs to random people. Where he got, and I don't, maybe this was, maybe they learned this later on, and, I'd already moved on and moved out of there, but, where those people, some of those people, the names, how did he pick out, this person's name? What did the ad executive do in New York or New Jersey? Like, what did that person do that he decided, I'm going to send him a bomb? So that's where, as an investigator, you think it has to be personal. Why would you just randomly go? It's different than, like I said, a lot of terrorists think, you mentioned 9/11, right? They're just trying to, espouse their views. They're trying to terrorize and, make a statement and make a point. But, in this case, it seemed to be targeted.
Yeah.
He seemed to be targeting people or targeting certain locations. Like he sent one to Boeing. I remember now with the airlines, it was United, it was the airline, then it was Boeing. So you think he's got something personal against Boeing or United or an airline. He's got something personal against this professor, right? That he's had some interaction with him along the way and is upset about it enough to try to kill him. So it just, as an investigator, you don't think that he's just trying to make a general statement or, espouse a view or a theory. It's just kind of hard to see it that way, and then there's this person who's afraid that the technology is going to destroy, like you say, social relationships and humanity, can then turn around and go kill someone and destroy humanity. That, he's destroying a human and a social, it just sort of seems to be a bit contradictory, in some ways,
absolutely,
to what he was trying to the statement he was trying to make. I don't know.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the main points I want to get across with the video, which I guess by the time people hear this, they'll already know that that's one of my kind of underlying thesis for it. But he really wasn't the sort of crusader he made himself out to be. But I hadn't yet thought about it from your all's perspective. Like, why would you guess this guy considers himself some do-gooder if his targets are just people, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting.
Right, turns out random people. I mean, the majority, I think, of people, that, every day, murders, violence, homicides, most of them, there's a personal connection, most of the time. That's what we see in, in law enforcement, is there's generally some personal connection when someone decides to take somebody else's life, and not just I'm going to pick this one person out because I saw his name on the news and I don't like what he said or something. You still think that it's personal. Like I'm saying, like, I saw this guy made a comment. I don't like his comment. I'm going to send him a bomb.
Yeah.
And all along he's really, just trying to make a statement. But in 17 years, that statement, he had to be highly frustrated when you look back, that in the 17 years or so that he was doing this, he never got his belief, his theory, his motive was never out there. It was never picked up. It was never determined. And so he probably had to be getting very frustrated along the line that, I'm trying to make a statement here and nobody's picking up on it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's partially what led to the eventual manifesto, like his right. Frustration with his position. I remember reading that, it's funny you mentioned, like, it feels like he just picked the names out of a hat, basically, or just like saw the news. The way that it turns out he picked a lot of his targets, at least near the end. Initially it was like, a plane or a university, but when he started targeting individuals, like the Exxon executive and things like that, he would go where he was at in Lincoln, Montana. He would bicycle out to a local library. It was like one of the only places he would visit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
And he would get like the daily paper and read about like tech advancements, and he would just pick names that he found in the paper.
look at where somebody made a comment or somebody was quoted as,
Exactly. Yeah.
right, yeah.
So like he would. I remember one of the professor's name was Epstein. He was a geneticist. I want to say this was at Berkeley. It might have been Yale. But like there was a article he read that Epstein had made advancements in genetics. So he's like, all right, bomb to that guy. He reads about the Exxon oil spill and that an executive named, I believe this was Gilbert Murray, that Gilbert Murray was defending Exxon in court. So he's like, all right, sending one to Murray. So yeah, it was the equivalent of just like drawing names out of a hat. If they showed up in the paper related to tech, he'd send them a bomb.
Yeah. Again, and you come back to there is maybe some personal element to it. Like I said, he doesn't like what this guy said. He didn't like that this guy's defending this guy or this guy. The Forestry Association, that was Gilbert Murray, actually. Like you said, that he was the Forestry.
He was the Forestry, okay. The other one was
the Forestry.
Thomas
The ad executive, that's who. Okay, so the ad executive, he had something to do with Exxon.
Yes.
Is that it, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, you come back to, for us, it just, you asked earlier, what was our thoughts and opinion when we saw the manifesto and saw what his, motive was. It just kind of took us by surprise because it just seemed like these are all individuals that he's had some personal interaction with at some point that didn't go well or didn't go his way, and then he's going to get revenge and so just trying to piece all that together or try to figure out what do these people have in common. It's still, you look at a geneticist, you look at Exxon or an ad executive, Forestry Association, engineers he goes on and think, what is the commonality here? What's the common denominator with all these people?
Yeah.
And there wasn't one, within, the scope of our investigation. We couldn't find a common denominator with all of these individuals or all these places. And sometimes it wasn't a person, it was a place, right? He sends it to Boeing.
Right.
Or he places it in the engineering lab. Sometimes it wasn't a person, but it was a place. And, still trying to figure out what does that have to do with the one that he sent before or that he placed outside the Radio Shack or the computer store in Salt Lake City? What does that have to do with that?
Yeah, of course.
So it was a very frustrating, and I'm sure for the people, and there were some agents that worked that probably from the, initiation, when the case was initiated rather from the first bombing. It probably had to be very frustrating over the years. And then when he stopped, I think he stopped after they got or it was believed that he stopped once. I think he stopped after he was seen. Right? Wasn't there
that was when
the last one?
That's when the 6-year gap happened.
Right.
So
so the belief was that he when they the sketch came out and all that stuff and the rewards started coming out in the sketch, then he stopped for 5 or 6 years, I believe, some period of time. And so, but it's still just trying to go back to all these years and what's the commonality? What do all these people have in common? What's the common denominator here? And how much is he, is he moving around? And then we later learned, right, that he was living in Montana and he would just go to these places. But, for us, we thought he must have lived in that area, to be familiar with it. Or that, again, now he's moved to, let's say he does plants or drops the bomb in Salt Lake City, and now the next one's in California. Okay, he's moved because now the next 2 or 3 were within the Bay Area, or in Northern California, I should say, because I think there was the Forestry Association guy was from Sacramento, and then you have the couple at Berkeley over the years, and then it seemed like, okay, now he's moved to this area. Again, another surprise of the investigation was that he had been living in that shack in Lincoln, Montana for the majority of the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He had for the entire bombing campaign, I believe, he was just in that shack that he purchased with his brother, and was just again, aside from the occasional letter to his brother or like visiting the library, he had almost no contact with the outside world, which explains why no one recognized the guy, right? Because there's only a handful of people who could.
Right, right. But the leads, you wouldn't believe the leads that we
I'd
got.
say.
You know, oh my gosh, I mean, hundreds of thousands of leads. Especially, like I said, when I was there, when things were really picking up, because he had, he just had the one bomb and killed the first person, early 90s, and now he's killed the second one. So things were picking up, and more resources were being devoted to this. They had the hotlines set up, the tip lines, and, every single person that called with a tip was followed up. Those tips were followed up on by agents, either, like I said, as multi-agency, but they were followed up on. And the people that were interviewed, and then, I remember doing some leads on, we started getting, a lot of, like, who had bomb experience. Who would, who's for, so we would get calls about, have you looked at this guy from, back in the 60s that was, planting bombs in this place, and that guy's still alive, and, maybe he needs to be interviewed. So all of those tips that were coming in, were being followed up on. And so the resources and the man hours and the drain, just to follow up on those leads. But once that sketch went out, and things, picked up, the people would knew it. Yeah. People call, I'll give society credit for that. People will call, I think I saw that guy sitting on a park bench, the other day. And, you go out and look in that park and see if you see anybody. And so there's a lot of leads that, but they're followed up on. So we always encourage anybody to call with anything. But, that sketch, a lot of people thought he looked familiar, but just nobody knew who, nobody was right, I guess.
I can only imagine how many people are like, I think my ex-husband's the Unabomber.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You get a lot of calls of, I know this guy, and he lived in this area, and he lived in that area, and, he would know how to build a bomb, because, again, the information that was going out at the time was, felt pretty comfortable that he grew up in Chicago, that he lived in Salt Lake City, and that he lived in the San Francisco area. That was the belief. That was our belief at the time. And we were right about Chicago. We were right that he did grow up in Chicago, or suburbs of Chicago. But, I don't think he ever lived in Salt Lake City, and I don't believe he ever lived in San Francisco either, to my knowledge. But he traveled. He did a lot of traveling to these places where he, physically placed the bombs. He didn't nail every bomb.
Yeah.
Like the one, the computer store that he was observed. So he did do that for a while.
Yeah, he like most of his trips, he would take like several day bus rides, because he just take a bus from Montana all the way to California. The only places that he really visited was, he grew up around Chicago, and then he went to Harvard for undergrad, and then he went to Berkeley for his doctorate, and that's where he taught for a while. Is that correct? Yes, Berkeley's where he taught for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
And then after that, he moved back with his parents for a while. He had a falling out with his brother when he worked at the processing plant his brother worked at, and then from there he just got the place in Nebraska, or Montana, I mean. And from there's where he began his bombing campaign. So yeah, like he other than like Berkeley and Chicago, most of his targets were like, again, I see how that would be so hard, because you imagine the guy has to be near where he's bombing. Or sending the bombs out, at least. You don't think he's taking a 3-day bus from the mountains to do it. Yeah.
Traveling with a bomb,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, he's got a backpack
and
full of them.
Traveling with it, yeah.
Biggest manhunt in the country, and this guy's got like backpacks of several like explosives. Bombs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. And is okay with, walking in into a place and leaving it, and just dropping it off. And I don't know why that one just keeps coming back to mind as the one that he placed in the engineering lab at Berkeley, like how he gets in there and not be seen and, all that. But, today it'd probably be a little bit different where there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah. He'd have a lot harder time.
Yeah, it'd be a little bit different today. And, but yeah, he didn't seem to be too concerned about being seen.
Yeah, and I do agree that one explosive at Berkeley does stick out in my mind, because that was one of two. Well, there was a few in the beginning, but that was one of them that it was just kind of like non-directional, right? Like he just leaves it in a room. We'll see who touches it. We'll let fate decide, right? It seems particularly like vile.
Yeah, I mean, that's why these, some people, like you say, maybe, think that, they favor him. It's hard for me to see it that way because of what he did and the people that he killed and the lives that he wrecked, destroyed. Even the people that survived, their lives were never the same. So I guess I don't have anything really positive to say about him, but
I don't blame you.
It is, I think you're right in terms of the message and the theory and, his belief of the, technology and what that was going to do to society was, he's pretty spot on with that.
Yeah.
For the most part. But,
yeah, the Unabomber was fine other than the bomber part, right?
Right.
I did want to ask, so are you, this all came out, I believe, during the trial, the details about it, because initially his defense team tried to take an insanity plea, but he didn't like that because, he didn't want to be seen as insane. He wanted to be seen as sort of like a messenger of sorts, right? So you had mentioned that there were some theories within the department that maybe he has like some kind of personal grudge against these people he's dealing with. Are you familiar at all with the quote-unquote experiments that happened to him when he was at Harvard?
Vaguely, yes. I mean, I do remember that. Like I said, I know he went to Harvard. He went very young. Like, was he like 16 or 15 or something like that when he started? And, and there was some experiments, but you can refresh my memory on what exactly they did to him, because I do remember there was some pretty bad things done to him there. But
so he got accepted to Harvard when he was 15. When he was in middle school, it was middle school. When he was in middle school, he was tested with an IQ of 167. Child prodigy. Everyone was real excited to see where he'd go. And he got accepted to Harvard at 15. He accelerated through his elementary or his middle and high school classes. So he starts going to Harvard when he's 16, and he meets a professor at Harvard named Henry Murray. And Henry Murray this was in 50, I want to say this was like 59, 58, 59, because I know he got his doctorate in 1967. So this would have been late 50s. And Henry Murray was a former member of the OSS, which the OSS was the group during World War II that eventually became the CIA. So Henry Murray was working experiments for the CIA during his time at Harvard. And one of these experiments that Ted Kaczynski was offered into was under the guise of being a sort of debate club. Like, students would write down on a piece of paper what their beliefs are, what their religious, political affiliation is, something like that. And the premise was they would then bring it before a professor, and there'd be kind of a debate about it. And the whole facade was that it was to encourage interaction between, students and teachers. What are the young minds of Harvard thinking? But in reality, it was a part of what many have called MK Ultra experiments, that it was an interrogation research study, effectively. So as Ted and several other students, but Ted's the focus, as Ted would write down his beliefs on a piece of paper and bring them before a professor, he would spend hours every week just berating Kaczynski. There's audio recordings that still exist from those meetings where you can hear the professor saying oh, well, clearly I'm surprised that you managed to pass high school. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have the mindset of a child, just verbally berating him. And Kaczynski was a part of this program for 3 years that he was at Harvard. So he would show up like 3 days a week and just get chewed out effectively and called inferior, stupid, what have you. And then he'd show back up and do it again. And in Kaczynski's own writings, he said that he kind of enjoyed it because he felt like it was a challenge. Like, oh, can I beat this? Can I best this professor in thought? And can I outdo him effectively? But what's interesting to me about it, and what I wanted to get your take on, is despite his eventual bombing campaign, despite even putting in his writings that he didn't like Murray or the people he met at Harvard, he never sent an explosive to Harvard, which I find very weird because, he sent him to Berkeley where he taught, he sent him to other colleges, but never Harvard, which is the one you would think that he would have a grudge with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That never occurred, or I guess I never thought of that. But that definitely is an interesting point, right? As because kind of like, I guess, to tie it in a little bit, where I was saying, some of these professors like at Northwestern or Berkeley, you thought there must have been some interaction where he was treated, or he was, humiliated, embarrassed, or something, berated, like you were saying. You think, well, there must have been something there. But that's a very interesting point, that where we know he was, berated, humiliated on a daily, weekly basis. Yeah, that he doesn't send one to Harvard. That's very interesting thought. Yeah.
That one's kind of, most of the details of the case I can kind of wrap my head around. Like, okay, he believed this, he did this, what have you. But that's one that's always like, huh. My theory with it, which I'll have God's a theory, because guy's dead. I can't go ask him, right?
Right.
But the more I think about it, I think maybe in some kind of sick and twisted way, maybe he sees what happened at Harvard as kind of like the trial by fire of sorts. Like, he kind of appreciates that they hardened him, because there's no way Murray could have known this, but effectively what he was doing is he was taking a guy with a high IQ and no social skills, and he spent 3 years hammering home, like making Kaczynski hammer his own philosophy into his head and grow to hate people more, which I'm sure, I wouldn't say is a direct cause, but it didn't help where Kaczynski eventually ended up, right?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't think he ever, to my knowledge, he never sat down and agreed to be interviewed, did he?
He did. So he did a couple of interviews. He was very resistant for a long time. The first interview he did was with, I forget her name. She's in the Netflix documentary about it. It's one of the 3 or 4 interviews he ever gave. This lady agreed to be interviewed under the pretense that they wouldn't talk. I believe the rule was they wouldn't talk about his guilt or whatever. It was just questions about his life growing up, stuff like that.
Yeah, I do remember that now. Yeah.
And he did that one, and then he did a couple more actually with anarchist associations. So there was, I believe it was called Green something, like Green Hate, Green Envy, something like that. It was a group of green anarchists, so they would protest, pipelines and stuff like that. He did an interview with them where he talked a little bit more about his motivations, but typically he was either really short in these interviews or he just never gave them. They were very few and far between. There was one time that I forget his name right now. He was the linguistics analyst in the case. The one who picked apart the manifesto for grammar, the way he would speak and stuff like that. He asked to have an interview with Kaczynski, and Kaczynski agreed. But then the day before, he gets a phone call, and Kaczynski says that he's too busy that day and he can't meet him. So
my calendar's full that day. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I know I've been in this 10 by 8 room for the past 14 years, but my schedule's full. I can't.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but yes, he was very reluctant to interviews in general.
Well, I was just thinking a bit here, and I wonder, and again, these are all just, random thoughts. You wonder if maybe he didn't send something to Harvard because he didn't want to be, that would be just a clue. Like everything that he did, in a way, he was elusive. Like I said, he was a very savvy, elusive target. And I think what he did as well, like you say, FC, he put those initials on, some of on the bombings, were carved in. The Nathan R, I always remember Robert V.
Yep.
Like what were those? And they were clearly, I believe, designed to throw investigators, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
again, you're spending all this time looking for Robert V and Nathan R, and what's FC, and are those his initials, and what could that stand for? And all this time, and so maybe he didn't want to get too close to home. Maybe, I don't know, again.
That's a good point.
It's just a thought that maybe he's like, well, I don't want to do anything to Harvard because, they may track me, they may get that may help identify me once they start digging into Harvard or so. I don't know. I just, that could be a thought too, maybe why he never did something to Harvard.
That's actually a really good point, because now that you mention it, think about what he was doing during those experiments with Murray. He was talking about his ideology and beliefs, and then he'd be, quote-unquote, debated on them, right? So at Harvard, there are 3 years' worth of documents of Ted Kaczynski explaining his ideology. So if he ever does attack Harvard, someone at Harvard may be like, hey, this reminds me of that student we had who was super against, the establishment, technology, or what have you. And even if his ideas weren't fully manifested yet, he definitely had some of those ideas from the audio recordings you can hear between him and Murray. So maybe he didn't attack Harvard, like you said, because Harvard has records upon records of what his ideology is.
Yeah, a little too close to home for him, maybe.
Yeah. That's a good point. That may be why he never did it. The Berkeley one makes a bit more sense to me, because by that point he was, I think, fully radicalized, possibly because of what happened at Harvard. But also at Berkeley, this was in 1966, I believe, or 67, in his journal, he didn't really have that many, friends or people he talked to, so he would journal everything. In his journal, we see for the first time that he fantasized about murdering someone. There was this psychiatrist that he wanted to kill, and he would write, this is while he was getting his doctorate there, he would fantasize about killing them. He even described it in his journal that upon realizing he wants to kill this person, he said he felt like a phoenix, like he was renewed, that this was the new course in his life. So at Berkeley, his murderous tendency started, and then, so to me, it makes sense why eventually he targeted Berkeley.
But isn't it strange that he never sends one to the psychiatrist?
It is. It is very strange.
Like the individuals that he actually had a reason in his mind, I'm not saying, in his mind, a reason to harm them, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Instead he goes after people that he's had no personal interaction with, that either, but going back to the ad executive, or, those people, like they said something he didn't like, he didn't like their actions. But again, the ones that have directly harmed him in his mind, he doesn't do anything. Yeah. Like you think he'd go after the professor at Harvard.
That's who I'd go after if I was that man.
The psychiatrist that he, I guess, what you're saying, if I understood correctly, right? The psychiatrist is when he first started having these visions of killing people. Yeah. Right?
That's the first time he ever wrote down that we can see that he fantasized about killing someone.
Do you think it would be someone that he didn't like, or had a personal interaction? And again, just going back to, generally, statistically, when people commit, homicides and murders, they, it's usually a person that they've had some interaction with, and not a random person, generally speaking.
There was several interactions like that he had personal a vendetta with someone, but he'd never acted on it. There was what caused the falling out with his brother David is David hired Ted. David was a plant manager or whatever. I think it was a rubber factory. It was some kind of processing factory. And Ted needed some money, so David hires him on. and then there was a girl at the factory who expressed some form of interest in Ted, and the two of them went out on a couple dates. Well, then
Did they double date? Did they double date with the brother? Maybe
that sounds right. I think they did that for like the first date, because I remember David described in an interview that Ted and her went out on one date alone, and then when Ted comes back, he was like, "She kissed me," and David describes it as like one of the few times he saw his brother like excited for social interaction.
Yeah.
So I think they had a double date and then that. But then after that second date, she tells Ted that she's not that interested in them, that she just wants to be friends. So Ted goes to the mill. This is so bizarre. He goes to the place they work, and he gets Post-it notes, and he starts writing. His brother described them as limericks. Like, he starts writing all these rhymes, like these little poems about how ugly she is, and about how like he was just saying profane things about her as a woman, and he was just putting them all over the workplace. So David was like, what are you doing? You can't do that. And Ted wouldn't quit, so David fired him. And that's what caused like Ted to cut ties with David. But Ted never attacked this woman physically. He wrote about it. He wrote in his journal about the thoughts of being violent to her, but he never did. He never attacked David physically. He wrote about cutting connections with him. But again, there's people who it seems like, yeah, I could see how someone who wants to kill people would be mad at this specific person, but he never attacked those people. He attacked, like you said, just dropping it off in rooms and, buildings.
Right. All under the guise of, I'm anti-technology, right? Or this post-industrial revolution, or the second industrial revolution, or whatever, but doesn't do anything to espouse that view in any of the bombs. There's nothing until he does the manifesto. There's nothing that he ever does that says why he's doing it.
Yeah.
To give investigators, a little insight into his mind. There's nothing that says that this is why I'm doing this. It's like, I want to see how smart, investigators are and see if they can figure this out. I'm just going to keep doing this until they figure it out.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes, ever how many people I have to kill. And then, again, maybe he just got so frustrated that investigators couldn't figure out the motive that he writes the manifesto. But
Did you ever read the manifesto at any point?
No. It was, like I said, it came in. It was, I don't remember how long. It was long.
It's 33 pages, I believe.
Okay. It was very long, and quite frankly, just didn't interest me.
I don't know.
It was hard. It was hard to read for me. Not being that highly intelligent as he was, it was it was difficult for me to read. But and truthfully, just didn't have time for it as the investigation. We had people reading it, a whole list of people reading it, analyzing it, and then we just got we got briefed on it and the gist of what it was. And then for us as investigators, by at that point, the decision was, and there were, like I said, there were a lot of clues in that manifesto before it was ever published, because he had quoted certain things in there, certain books, he quoted certain authors, certain, there were things that he had quoted that were kind of sending us on different leads, different directions as to, hey, he quoted this, something to do with the Chinese or something in there. I remember that one. And then, and now you're off down that rabbit hole. And so there were just a lot of leads that came out of it, but I never actually took the time to read it. And again, I left after that and was, busy on other matters, and just never went back to read it.
The reason that I bring it up is because it's kind of bizarre to read, because the context around it, that you sit down to read and you're like, okay, this is the Unabomber, right? But he spends the beginning talking about why he bombed stuff, and he spends the tail end talking about why he bombed stuff. But the majority of the middle like he spends, I want to say 10 pages of it talking about leftist, why liberalism is bad, or like why most
Mm-hmm.
political things don't matter. And then he spends a really long time describing his problems with general economic systems, or like why historically. I believe he talks about China for a while, about like why China had like an economy collapse because they did XYZ wrong. Uh, and it's weird. It's like you get midway through and you're like, isn't this supposed to be justifying
Yeah.
blowing stuff up? And like he does lay out, again, mostly in the beginning and end, why technology is a detriment, because it's like, it pushes us further away from each other, which are the parts that
Right.
people tend to give more focus than the rest of it, that it makes us effectively antisocial. And then at the tail end, he's like, yeah, so anyway, because of that, we have to start blowing stuff up. And it's like he doesn't even try really to make a connection between technology bad, blow up college student. Like he doesn't even try to bridge them. Which I always found is kind of weird. Like, you send 33 pages explaining why blowing up stuff's good, but you never explain why blowing up stuff is good.
Right.
It was,
Yeah.
it was bizarre.
Yeah. It didn't, like I said, the whole thing, if you look at it, did just never, when I, once I looked back and, watched a little bit after he was caught, some of the documentaries and stuff, it just, to me, it just, none of it really made sense. And some of the things, like I said, we've discussed was, I'm just going to go kill these random people because I believe that technology is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how are people, how are investigators supposed to piece that together? I mean, it just, and he provided clues along the way that really were designed to throw you off.
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
nothing in the things and the clues that he left, the communications, that he had within the bombs themselves. There was nothing there to, even in hindsight, looking back, there was nothing there that pointed toward, this guy has a problem with technology and thinks that, technology is going to be the destruction of humanity. I mean, there was nothing there.
Mm, yeah.
So I say it just, some of it just, never really made sense to me all along that was, the investigators should have figured, oh, well, that was a clue we missed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, now that one. But if you look back at the clues that he left, what is Freedom Club?
Yeah.
Like, what does Freedom Club have to do? There really wasn't. I don't think there was a Freedom
No,
Club.
there wasn't. It was an alias he used to make it seem like it was more than one person.
Okay, so see what I mean? Like he in one hand he says, I'm doing all this because I'm trying to, this is my ideology. This is what I believe in. And people need to know it. I don't want to get this out. But yet he spends a lot of time planting clues to send you in the other direction, or not, or in a direction that is not associated with his ideology.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look back, I don't think there was anything that as investigators you would say, oh, that was the red flag right there that we missed. That if we'd followed up on that, or if we had done XYZ, that may have helped us identify. And there was nothing there in that, within the clues that he left. I was just like I think one of them was something like, I told you it would work.
I believe he says,
Woo.
look, woo. Yep. Look, woo. I told you it would work.
Woo.
Yeah.
I told you it would work. Like, what? So there you go back to, well, must be a personal interaction. It must be something that, like, I told you it worked. So somebody that is told him he couldn't build somewhere along the line there's this interaction, and it just, I don't think that aspect of it ever materialized.
Oh, that was another red herring, it seems.
Yeah. So see, it's kind of like, here's a guy who is, I'm going to keep doing this until, you print my manifesto. I'm going to keep killing people. But all the time that he's, sending bombs and killing people, he's not trying to further his ideology, at least publicly.
Yeah.
Or in the open. And so then, to me, sometimes you just look back and say, well, I don't know. Maybe it's just, psychosis.
Yeah,
I
he.
don't know.
It's interesting. He did all kinds of stuff to kind of lead, investigators away from writing things like Wu, Nathan R, and all that. But there was one time, or actually not one time. He did this a couple times when he was on the bus to go deliver the mail bombs. He would stop at gas station bathrooms and pick up hairs off the floor and put the hairs in the bomb. That way, if the FBI finds
Right.
the remains, they'll be doing a forensic analysis on just a random guy. So like he was doing all kinds of stuff, and I hadn't really thought about it the way you just phrased it. But yeah, most terrorists tend to take credit for their bombings because that's the point, right? Like
Right.
to get an ideology across. But he wanted to do the terrorism part without actually getting like the ideology part across, right? And eventually he had to literally spell it out for people with the manifesto.
Right. But he's not even, he's not even leaving clues that would help, get his ideology out.
Yeah.
He's actually trying to get you going, down a rabbit hole in another direction. So he's not even. It's like, okay, here's my manifesto. If you publish my manifesto, I will stop bombing. I'll stop killing people and bombing. Sending bombs.
Yeah.
But over the 17 years, he doesn't do anything to sort of say, hey, here's my ideology, right?
Right.
Here's a clue. Here's a clue into my mind. He doesn't do that. He puts a clue there designed to lead you away from, his ideology. So that's why I said sometimes you look back and go, it just doesn't, a lot of what he did just really doesn't make sense. When you look at, like you just said, when you look at terrorists, it's normally a big statement. We did this, we took credit, and this is why we did it. And he didn't do that for 17 years.
Yeah. I think, and this is kind of a spoiler for my video, but again, by the time people hear this, the video will be out. But really what I'm trying to do with the video is get the point across. In my theory, I don't think he ever was a proponent for nature. I think he hated people, and he liked the fact that nature didn't have people in it. He decided to be a misanthrope, to kind of despise humanity, and then window shopped for an ideology that made him sound righteous. I think he hated people first, and the nature came later. And I've been reading a bunch of excerpts from his journals that he took while he was living in that cabin. And one of the journal entries from 1971, this is right before he kicked off the bombing campaign. At this point, he had determined what he was going to do. And he took like 6 years to assemble the first one and get it shipped out. But in 1971, when deciding that he was going to begin this terrorist campaign, he said, "My motive for doing what I am going to do is simply personal revenge. I do not expect to accomplish anything by it. Of course, if my crime, and my reasons for committing it, gets any public attention, it may help to stimulate public interest in the technology question, and thereby improve the chances of stopping technology before it's too late. But on the other hand, most people will probably be repelled by my crime, and the opponents of freedom may use it as a weapon to support their arguments for control over human behavior. I have no way of knowing whether my action will do more good than harm. I certainly don't claim to be an altruist or to be acting for the good, whatever that is, of the human race. I act merely from a desire for revenge. Of course, I would like to get revenge on the whole scientific and bureaucratic establishment, not to mention communists and others who threaten freedom, but that being impossible, I have to content myself with just a little revenge." So, off that, I think that he was determined to just take out his revenge on humanity. He didn't like people. He didn't like how they treated him. And he even says right there, my goal is revenge. And, maybe if people don't like technology because of what I'm doing, that'd be cool. But really, I just care about getting even. I think that's why he did what he did. And I think all of that technology bad stuff was just dressing.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. you look, it still begs the question, doesn't it? Though, then if it's revenge, why not the people that you feel have harmed you?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the Harvard professor. You know, why not those people? The girl that he, that just, you know, kicked him to the side. That. What about these people? And then I think he had some issues with his parents too. But I can't remember. Maybe you know more about than I do.
He
But
he
with this,
he did somewhat. He felt that his parents, at a young age, he got sick when he was in the hospital, and his mom like kind of turned him over to the hospital staff. She never like abandoned him, but Ted always felt that his parents had abandoned him, and that as he got older, he felt that they pressured him to do more and more scholastic things. Like for example, he skipped the 6th grade because his IQ was so high. And he always resented his parents for that because he felt that stunted his social development. So his parents weren't really like that bad, but he did have perceived issues with them.
yeah. But yeah, no, I guess to your point, yeah, I'd say you're spot on with that. And again, it goes back to it just didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
right? And then, when you're talking about his, writings from the diary, it's all, what does he says? This is all about revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And if something, else comes out of it, then so be it. But it still just, to me, begs the question. And going back to what I was saying as investigators, you statistically, generally speaking, people that commit these crimes have a personal vendetta or some personal interaction, or something that didn't go right, and
Yeah.
but he stayed away from that. He stayed away from the personal elements of it, you know, and you're probably right.
I, I
It all was, for him just about a reason, a motive that he could justify in his mind to do what he was doing, you
the
know.
only way I can think about, because I asked myself that too, like, okay, if he just wants revenge, why not kill his brother? Why not kill the Professor Murray, right?
Right.
Or the psychologist or the woman who dumped him. The only thing I can think is another thing I get by reading his journal is that Kaczynski was a bit of a coward, in like a personal sense. Like he didn't have a lot of social skills, but it seems to be greater than that. He seems to be afraid to take action about things in his life. Like there was a scientist. This was before his bombing. I want to say this was like 72, 73. There was a scientist who he thought about killing, and he thought about stabbing him. He thought about shooting him, and he even admits in his journal, he's like, I don't think I could do that. I think I'm a little afraid of, walking up to him and doing that. So then he thinks about building a bomb, and he's like, well, I don't want to be there when it goes off because that I could get caught. Like that could be weird. So he picks really the most cowardly way to kill someone, to build a bomb and then ship it to a state you're not even in, right? So
Right.
I think that maybe the reason he didn't kill Murray, the reason he didn't kill that woman or David or what have you, is because he was afraid. I think he was a coward to actually act about what he wants. I think he would just act out at some other target. He would take it out on someone else, basically, I believe.
Yeah. And to me, he never showed any remorse for anything that he did. I don't think there was ever, oh, I'm sorry I killed this person, or, you know, I'm sorry I injured this. There, to my knowledge, I don't recall. And again, I like you, you've read all that. I haven't, but I don't think I ever saw or heard remorse from him,
N-
for anything that he did.
No, there none at all. Actually, quite the opposite. After his trial, so after his lawyers tried to take the insanity plea and he talked him out of it, he did plead guilty. And during what did they call it? After it, like the sentence when the sentencing's being figured out. Oh, impact statements, right? So
Right.
the impact statements were after his attorneys already cut a deal that he wouldn't get the death penalty, he'd just get life sentences. So the deal had already been made. He was already sentenced to multiple life sentences. and then they have the impact statements from the victims. So, all the victims' family members come forward, talk about what was taken from them, what Kaczynski's done to them. And yeah, this was in one. I've watched so many documentaries about Ted in preparation.
Yeah.
I think this was the Netflix one, but I can't remember. It was a psychologist who was like slightly, I don't want to say sympathetic of Ted, but he was interested in hearing out what Ted had to say. So Ted allowed him to do, not really interviews, but to ask him questions regarding the case, to kind of, like Ted kind of trusted him in a sense, right? So this doctor was in the courtroom while the families were giving their impact statements, and he says he looks over at Ted, and Ted's just like blankly staring at the person talking, no reaction. And after it was over, as they walk out of the courtroom, Ted was like, "What was all that about?" And the guy's like, "Oh, well, it was the impact statements of the family members." And Ted looked puzzled, and he said, "That doesn't make any sense. I've already been sentenced. Like, why did they do that?" And the guy was like, "Well, that's because, these are the family members of those who you killed, who you harmed. And the point of it was to try to get you to realize that." And Ted was like, "Huh, that's kind of bizarre." And just goes about it. Like, not even processing, like, that he should feel some guilt about it. Like, he was just like, "Wow, that was weird. I'm already sentenced."
Well, almost like a antisocial or, psychosis, right?
Yeah, yeah. I do think a lot of...
Psychopath.
Yeah. I do think he definitely had some psychopathic tendencies. I'd say he's probably more of a I'm not a therapist by any means, or a psychiatrist, but I'd say he exhibited more sociopathic symptoms because he doesn't seem born with it. It seems to be something that was kind of cultivated in him over time. But he definitely did grow a kind of distance from humanity, from social interaction. And I think that's what shaped a lot of things like him in the courtroom. There's this idea a lot of people have of Ted Kaczynski as he was just a guy who really liked nature and he hated seeing nature get torn down. But I really think he was someone who just hated people, and he didn't like people, so he found nature, which has less people, so that's why he liked it.
But didn't he say though in the manifesto though, doesn't he, or maybe I'm confusing him with somebody else, but maybe doesn't he talk about how technology is going to destroy humanity, like you say, the social relationships, the internet's going to take you away from doesn't he talk about what he thinks that technology is going to do to the humanity, the human side of it? Doesn't he talk about that?
He does. He talks about that a lot.
And so, I mean, if you just look at some of the contradictions, he says all that, but yet here's a guy who wants no social interaction with anybody, right? He wants to go stay in a 10 by 10 foot cabin in Lincoln, Montana, and never talk to anybody that he doesn't have to, right?
Yeah,
so it's funny that he's concerned that this technology is going to destroy relationships and humanity, I guess. I'm just in broad terms, the part of, the human race, and yet he wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to interact with people. He doesn't, people are going to lose jobs, all these things that they talk about technology's doing, and yet he doesn't have any of that, doesn't want any of it, doesn't participate,
Yeah.
It just seems to a little bit, to show a little bit of his mental, his mindset.
He seems like a hypocrite, doesn't he?
Right. Yeah. Oh, very. Yeah.
In short, basically, I think Kaczynski was a bit of a poser. And I think that he said a lot of things to make himself sound more valiant, altruistic or whatever. But I mean, as I read, that I don't think that was ever his goal. I think he just wanted to get even because he felt wronged by humanity in a sense. So he wanted to take it out on something.
And he didn't seem though. You look back at a lot of people that do this, right? Like some of these, people, these serial killers like this, they're looking for their ego. It's an ego bump, to see the news, to toy with with the investigators. A lot of it is about just, feeding their ego or bumping up their ego. But yet I don't know that I saw that or I see that with him, that this was about, feeling more important than he is or being somebody. The world will know my name. I don't know that he seemed to care about that. I don't know.
I think maybe there was some personal ego to it. I think because I think he got satisfaction out of blowing stuff up, right? Like he would write in his notebook like success whenever someone died in a bombing, right? So I think maybe he got personal satisfaction, but yeah, there isn't a need, at least not directly. There isn't a need to prove himself to others. I think maybe there's a need to prove himself to himself. To, kind of like, maybe he didn't need others to think he was better than them. He just needed to think that he was better than others.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder what it would be like now with the 24-hour news cycles and, cable news. And, at least back in his day, you didn't have the constant 24-hour talking about him all day long on whatever channel you turn to.
Yeah, I wonder how he feels knowing if he knew a YouTuber was going to make a video.
And I want every YouTuber out there, podcast, everybody to be talking about me.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love that.
And I saw it was suicide, right? Didn't he kill himself? But was he sick or something?
Yeah, so
I haven't even had a chance to follow up on that. But
yeah, so he got diagnosed with bowel cancer. I think it was bowel cancer. It was some kind of cancer. I want to say like 3-4 years ago. And he refused treatment because, the dude lives in a solitary confinement, right? Like he's not super excited to keep living. So he refused treatment, and 3 months before he died, he got transmitted to the sick bay, effectively, like whatever they consider their healthcare facility within the jail, because he was still at the Supermax out west, if I recall right. So he was kept inside of the prison, but he was transferred to the sick area, and they said that he was end of life, like at any time now he could pass away. And then he goes back to his cell for a little bit, kind of on a hospice care, and then he died in June. So, but then, yeah, the stuff I saw said suicide. I think what happened is he was refusing medication and whatnot. He was starving himself for a while. I haven't found anything specific about a method, that if he maybe hung himself or maybe what happened, but he was about to die for a while. If he did one final thing to kind of end the pain, I could see that.
Yeah, I didn't. I just saw, that he died and that it was suicide. I haven't followed up on it to see if they, like you say, what method,
Yeah.
How'd he do it?
Yeah, I'm sure he probably, he might have hung himself. He actually tried to hang himself during his trial when he first got arrested. But I imagine they don't keep you on suicide watch for 30 years. So
Supermax, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure he hung himself. Yeah. I'm sure he hung himself. Actually, when he was first arrested, he was in there at the same time as like Timothy McVeigh.
And
Timothy
McVeigh and Robert Hansen.
Yep.
There's a couple others out there, but yeah, Timothy McVeigh. He was here in Terre Haute. I live in Indiana, so they had him in Terre Haute here, and that's where he, they put him to death there because that's where they do all their death penalty executions is Terre Haute. So we were out there for that because I was in Indianapolis at that time. But
interesting. But yeah, so that's really all I want. I basically wanted to get your feelings about the case, what it was like on the investigative side and whatnot. Is there anything else you can think to mention, or anything you want to bring up about the Unabomber?
No, I don't think so. I think we've had a good long discussion on that.
I think we have. Well,
17 years. I can't think of anything that pertinent or relevant. Yeah.
Well, I can definitely say that I greatly appreciate your time, and I know my audience will. It really means a lot you willing to talk about it. I know it's been a while, so thank you very much for refreshing your memory about a lot of stuff, and thank you very much for letting us hear your side of the story. It means the most. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely, and I hope you all enjoyed. And give her a thank you in the comments to say thank you for your time, because there's not a lot of FBI agents, at least not ones I met, cool enough to do a YouTube interview. So this means a lot. I hope you all appreciate her.